Yo, what up, Sci Fam? It's your boy Nickel, and today we're going to look at SARS-CoV2 cellular pathology. So go ahead and title your page. And as you know, SARS-CoV2 is that virus. And we're going to understand how it affects, how it infects cells. So we would call that cellular pathology. Don't be afraid of the name. It's just a new vocabulary term for you here as we dig deeper into the science. So speaking of digging deeper into the science, let me teach about, well, I need to make sure that I've got my pen here. I want to teach about cells. And I want to teach about these things that we call Ace2 proteins. Now, Ace2 proteins are cell surface proteins. Most cells, almost all cells, I think, are covered, their outer surface is covered in proteins. Those proteins can do all types of stuff. And they can receive messages from other cells, they can send messages to other cells, and so on. Well, viruses kind of hijack this system. That's why we call them parasites. It's because they hijack the system so they can hijack the cell. So let's learn about how this all goes down. Well, before we do, these Ace2 proteins are found on only certain types of cells. So Ace2 proteins are going to be found on cells located in your kidneys, located in your heart. These Ace2 proteins are in your blood vessels, the cells of your blood vessels, in your colon, and even in your ileum. And excuse me if I mispronounced that there, but basically it's the bottom of your small intestine. So they're in our intestine, blood vessels, heart, kidneys, but importantly for current times, they're also found in our lungs, alveoli cells. So lung alveoli cells. So if we think about that idea we were talking about with transmission, if someone were to, touch something and touch their mouth, then that virus gets into your mouth. Well, if a virus gets in your mouth, it's going to most easily get into your lungs alveoli cells. Or if you breathe something in, it goes right into your lungs. So that virus is going to most often affect somebody's lungs. It's not so easy for it to go directly to the heart or to the kidneys or so on. So typically when we're talking about this COVID-19, it's affecting people's lungs and giving them respiratory issues because the Ace2 proteins can be found pretty plentifully on the lungs alveoli cells. So let's zoom on in. Here we have on the left our COVID, actually it's not COVID because this is the virus. So I need your help here. SARS-CoV2 is the virus. And it's covered in all these little projection things here. These projections are like little spikes. They're not so sharp like spikes, but all of these little things here, these are all surface proteins of the virus. And they're called by scientists spike proteins. And they're abbreviated as S proteins. So S proteins cover the surface of the SARS-CoV2. Well, if this is our human cell, and for this case, we'll pretend it's a lung alveoli cell. It's got all these different proteins on the outside of the cell, so there's, different shapes and sizes. But these ones that I've shown here have a shape that matches the spike protein shape. And so the SARS-CoV2 virus actually easily goes to these little projection proteins. And if you were thinking it, you're right. All of these things here, these are Ace2 proteins. And there's a bunch of them here on this cell. So it's all those ones. Okay, so you can see the human cell has these Ace2 proteins on its surface. The SARS-CoV2 virus has all these spike proteins on its surface. And so let's explain a little bit more about how these interact with each other. So the Ace2 is something on the cell that receives information. So the Ace2, we call that a receptor. It actually is going to attract the S proteins, those spike proteins. So it attracts the S proteins, allowing the virus RNA to enter the human cell. Now let's back up for a second. Yep, I said virus RNA. We have genetic information in our cells. Our DNA is inside of our nucleus, and it creates our RNA so that our body can make the proteins in our body. Well, the virus doesn't have the DNA, it just has the RNA. So this specific type of virus, the SARS-CoV2, we would call it an RNA virus, because inside of the cell, inside of that virus, if we could go in there, we would find just a spool of RNA. And the reason it wants to come and dock onto the human cell is because the virus doesn't have the equipment inside of it to turn the RNA, or to copy the RNA to make more copies of itself to reproduce. So it basically goes in as a parasite. It is attracted to those Ace2 receptors, and it just goes crazy in those cells. Or it makes the cell go crazy, at least, doing the work for the virus. And so the human cell is basically hijacked. It's forced to copy the virus RNA, because the virus doesn't have that machinery to copy the RNA, but the human cell does. So it lands on the human cell and it's like, listen up, I need you to copy my RNA. Go, 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 go. And so what happens is that the virus, let me get back to where I was here. Okay, the virus RNA actually overwhelms the host cell. And we say host cell because it's like, well, you know, that cell is hosting the virus, even though it doesn't really want to. It's like forced to do the copying of the RNA. Well, that virus RNA, when it copies, it's when it's forcing the cell to copy itself, it overwhelms that host cell. As the host cell makes tons of virus RNA copies. And those copies go on to infect and damage other cells. So what's happening is if somebody gets, if they, get those SARS-CoV2 into their body, they develop COVID-19. COVID-19 means that the person's cells are copying the virus RNA over and over and over and over again, and the cell can't do its normal job. And so it just like gives up and quits, and it's like, boom, dead cell. Well, in that process, it created a lot more virus, and that virus goes on to infect more cells, and it breaks those cells down as they're forced to make the RNA for the virus. And so that's why this virus is so damaging to the human body, because it takes over the cells, it overwhelms the cells can't do their job. The only thing they can do is copy the RNA of the virus. It's pretty grim. And that is SARS-CoV-2 cellular pathology. See you on the next one. Peace.